ableism.
Case ableism.
And then there will be, it'll get a bit ranty on ableism, almost. So let's see what it looks like. Yeah, so be kind of prepared for that kind of stuff. Anybody not ready? On case, they concede all of their arguments about how playing up the legalization narrative always already centers on ableist terms that only address civil society rather than the psychological aversion to things like disability and race, which means that people will never actually try and have these discussions in a world where you're just trying to counter narrative to the law. It's not a counter narrative to the underlying structures that are much more than the law, that transcend civil society, that go into epistemology and the way that we think about bodies themselves and what a clean and proper body is and who we are able to relate to, because who we think has cognition, who versus who doesn't, who is a danger to everyone around them versus who is not. These are already arbitrary distinctions that are made by much more than just the law, but by individual people on a psychological level, which means that these questions never get resolved in the world of the app because they just posit a counter-narrative that does not actually hold us accountable to the way that ableist things happen, as well as they still don't have any explanation as to how they change things out there. The only thing I think they have inroads into is how they might change to the debate space by entering activism, as well as any argument about how they're able to achieve activism out there still applies to us as well, because we go to protests and things against things like Autism Speaks. Our use of disability studies scholarship actually gets carried outside of round two, but our argument is always that, especially in debate, when you are a debate judge, you should think about our relationships to debate first, which I'll go over later, as well as they concede all of the arguments about how they construct a normative version of what it means to care. I'm fucking tired of being told that I don't care about our arguments because I don't know how to show that I care a shit ton, because this is something that is important to me, to my daily life. All these arguments go conceded. Don't allow them to say we didn't go for those, because these are definitely links. These are things that already construct a normative body, a normative engagement for debate, as well as a normative identity debater. I would fucking say I'm an identity debater, but lots of people wouldn't say I am because I don't have the normative pathos that is already prescribed to be an identity debater. I don't talk as loud as others, nor do I ever use a cool meter and rhyme, but I do certainly care about what I'm talking about and live it every fucking day. On to ableism proper. Yeah. You should extend through the role of the ballot that you should vote for the team that thus has the best study in ableism. They don't really address this because they think ours is to insert disability scholarship or something like that. However, our argument is that the way that you relate to bodies and what bodies are allowable in debate and what you even think is a proper body in terms of even everywhere else in your life is already determined by ableism, which applies across multiple sectors. Wolverine in 08 argues that ableism applied to things like immigrants to preclude them from poverty. Things like the 1907 Immigration Act specifically said that disabled people and diseased people would not be able to come over. People with more than 2 bouts of like insanity or more would not be allowed to come over, which also got to play to race or racial issues as well, which means that despite the fact that people of color are not disabled, they were portrayed as such by ableism because it says you do not live up to the white able body standard, which always gets propagated in the world of the app. Any risk of a link about the normative caring stuff, as well as I'll go over more links later, means that they are still propagating what disability studies is, as well as this argument actually applies best because it's about debate and how we can relate to each other and people in the first place. Their arguments still function in a world out there in which you assume counter-narratives. However, we are able to disrupt the ableist standard that determines the topic already, because the topic is not accountable to tons of people in the community, because it has precluded the discussions that we actually want to have. And as well as it's not just about the fact that it did include such as things like black bodies and immigration and homelessness, but also the things that it did fucking include, such as physician-assisted suicide, which is a messed up act that I've heard tons of people and my actual activist friends and disability scholars like Zach Richter says that he would never vote for PASF because of the way that it already portrays disability. We don't hold this community accountable because we don't ever talk about these things. Disability especially gets glossed over every fucking day because you just on the high or under, like struck through a single line in your 1AC does not mean that you talked about disability meaningfully. I don't even think I hear the word disability in the 1AC, which means that even if that is just a link of omission, it's still something that's very important because we should view this as a question of who better calls for community accountability. We address multiple intersections in multiple ways the community is fucked up. Well, they talk a lot about deportation, which certainly is a fucked up thing, but I think our alternative is slightly more inclusive of that, as well as they over-determine what a community can be and allow it to be closed because they don't disrupt the very boundaries of who we allow to exist in the first place. Our LS in 14 evidence talks about how we can bridge the gap between scholarship and activism by inserting our disability studies scholarship into these things, which means to dream with disability studies, to hold people accountable to the material realities that often cause contradictions, whether it be the fact that people use ableist language or propagate false notions about disability groups like Crip Hop, Sins, Invalid, and us at a protest are already actively fighting against these things, but we think it's most important to fight against these in debate, which is like Chandler and 12 evidence, which talks about how we need to destabilize the community, because only when we say that we don't explicitly know who our community members are can we ever fight that. We will, and also Lee said some of the big story that they say that we would have to be crazy. Paleys being deported is also a metaphor, which they say they get deported in debate, but that's still an example of the metaphor of actually being physically deported, which does not apply as well as their cognitive disability rhetoric about how the world is framed, as well as they don't see a future with disability. No, there's no explanation of how they're able to affirm us or how we are even included in their discussion besides, hey, we can do that too. However, they could see multiple arguments on the permutation, the first of which I want to go for is Kroger in 12 that says it's always accommodation, it's always a response to disability. Rather than creating access beforehand and saying who is not here, it says, oh, well, you just raised a valid complaint, now we'll respond to it, which always puts the onus on people to call out the assistance of oppression rather than actively confront them themselves, as well as the permutation is a way to thwart disability from taking the center of our discussion. That's our Hughes in 12 evidence from the 1 and C, because it talks about how ableist sensibilities always try and push disability back down and say you shouldn't talk about that, don't worry, it'll be okay, you shouldn't be the center of our discussion or even a part of the discussion, which the permutation always replicates. These arguments don't concede, which means I think they all can be inclusive of their discussion, but theirs can't.